Hello. That was way louder than it should have been. Me again. I'll talk a little quieter. Thank you, Mike. That was great. So next up, we've got Marcel. He made me a promise that he's not going to show any spreadsheets, but there will be math. So be prepared. And without further ado, Marcel. Oh, you don't need this.
All right. Wow. What a riveting introduction. All right, everyone. I see laptops open over here. At the back, I see phones. I see people in the corner. Close the laptops. Come over here to the middle of the room. Show of hands, who's here to waste their time? Anyone? Yeah, okay, one person. Same here. I didn't come to waste my time. What I can tell you is that the barbecue that we all consumed at lunch is starting to have our blood sugar nosedive. And if you feel the way that I feel right now, you're going to get very little out of a talk that has a lot to do with numbers. But this is probably the most important thing that we can talk about today, because we're going to talk about pricing and how to not get fucked when you sell to enterprise. Anybody interested in learning about that? Okay. So in order to make sure that we all get something out of this, I want to invite you all to join me in celebrating Rachel and the entire team that put this together. And in doing that, we'll also elevate our energy so that we can actually focus and get something out of the next 20 minutes. Are we all on board with that? Yes or yes? Let's try that one more time. Yes or yes? Okay, I'm going to invite everyone to get on up, stand up with me, and I want you to visualize. That's right, get up out of your seat. I want you to visualize for a moment that we're all in a massive football stadium, or soccer for the Americans in the room, okay? And it's like the World Cup final, and Rachel is lining up to take the game-winning penalty kick, okay? So she's standing at the line. She's brutally hungover from the night before. We know this. No one else in the stadium does. And we have got to cheer her on. So we're going to jump up and down and clap. You can't look any stupider than I do. Don't worry. All right, here we go. Ole, 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 ole. Ole, ole. Keep it going. Ole, 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 ole. Ole. Ole, where's Rachel? Ole, 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 ole. Ole, ole. Ole, 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 ole. Ole, ole. Let's give it up for Rachel for putting this all together. All right, have a seat. Our energy is up. I appreciate you indulging me. I'm a very demanding speaker. You need to know this right away. So I'm going to be asking questions. I'm going to be asking for engagement. I need you to engage with me, or I'm going to have a mental breakdown on stage, okay? We all want to avoid that. It's not going to be pretty. So let's talk about profitability optimization. First and foremost, who am I? My name is Marcel. I run a company called Parakeeto. I run a podcast called the Agency Profit Podcast. Anybody listened to that before in the room? A few hands. Okay, that did not go the way that I planned. I've worked with a couple of agencies that are here in the room. We currently work with Roswell. Nihar and James are here. We've worked with Adrian at Tonti, and we'd love to work with more of you. And what we do is we help agencies measure and improve profitability. That's it. That's all we do. We're not an accounting firm that does this CFO stuff on the side, but really only cares about doing your taxes. Our whole thing is helping make sure that you understand if you're profitable and what you can do to improve it, and then you have data every day that helps you make better decisions. And so there are a lot of ways in which you might be struggling with this, and I want to describe what I see all the time. It's called the cycle of insolvency. It's the unfortunate experience that a lot of us have had building and scaling a service-based company. So we grow the top line revenue of the business. Maybe we move up market. We land a huge logo, the biggest client we've ever had. Everybody's thrilled and excited. Very shortly after that, our team gets overwhelmed with all of this new work that's coming in. So we roll up our sleeves as founders, we get back into the weeds to help them get through it. And then we realize, oh shit, I need to be working on the business, not in the business. Let me hire some people so I can get back to building the company. But while we do that, we take on additional payroll. That new payroll is not productive. We focus on training them. Meanwhile, we haven't been as focused on sales as we were before. And our profitability drops. We finally have these people productive, and we go, oh shit, I need more business to keep these people busy. We go back to selling, we grow the top line revenue of the business, and before we know it, we're right back in the middle of the cycle. Does this sound familiar to anyone? Are we getting some PTSD from this? Right? So I've heard a few times people say, I thought we were going to grow out of this, but every time we get bigger, the same problems are there, just the problems get bigger. And in some cases, I've spoken to founders that have doubled, tripled their business in 18 months and actually are personally making less money than they were when the revenue was lower, there was less headaches, less team members, less stress, lower stakes. And so there's a lot of reasons why that could be. We're going to talk about one of them today, which is pricing. And so I want to make a couple of promises. There are 3 things we're going to talk about. Number 1, we're going to talk about a pricing formula. Show of hands, how many of you, not a formula, but a formula? Yeah, I can't draw and my handwriting is terrible. And for some reason, this is how I do presentations. Don't ask me why. So have you ever asked yourself, how much should we be charging and are we charging the right amount? Anybody ever pondered that? Maybe you're currently pondering that. I'm going to give you a formula that allows you to know, no matter what you're selling, no matter how you sell it, whether it's hourly, it's a flat rate, it's value-based, it's retainer, it's project-based, it's sprint-based, there's one formula you can use to understand how much to charge and know if you're going to be profitable every single time. Anybody interested in learning that? Yes or yes? Let's try that again. Yes or yes? Okay, I told you I was demanding. Then we're going to talk about a pricing framework. Okay? So, what's the best pricing model? It's a trick question. The answer is the one that gives you the best margin. But if you're anything like me, your news feed has been filled with content telling you that you might as well throw yourself off a bridge if you've ever billed on time and materials, that you can't possibly scale an agency doing it that way. Meanwhile, all 5 of the biggest professional services firms on the planet pretty much only bill on time and materials. So that's weird. How could that be possible? You're being asked to do value-based pricing, but you can't always scope the work. And fundamentally, the assumption behind a value-based price is that you know what the scope is going to be. So we're going to talk about a framework on how to identify when is the right time to use productized, value-based pricing, or when to use time and materials or abstracted versions of that. And in particular, how to adapt to the enterprise context, which we've heard time and time again today has a lot of fluidity. So how do you price for profit when you don't know what it's actually going to take or what it's going to cost you to get an outcome to a client? And then the last thing we're going to talk about is targets. So that you never need to ask yourself, how much should I charge ever again? You'll always know what the answer to that question is. And I'll give you a hot tip. It has nothing to do with what other people are charging. It has to do with what your margins need to be and what your cost basis is as a company. So as long as we can get clear on that, you can make decisions that are setting you up for success and know that with confidence every single time. Or I can get off stage and go and have a snack and give you all some time to go to the bathroom. What do you prefer? Do we want to learn this, or do we want to take a break? Do it. Yeah? Round of applause if we want to learn it? Okay. Amazing. All of this is to keep you engaged, because we're going to do math now, and the attention will drop down. So a couple of notes. I can make this simple, but I can't make it easy, right? And there's a lot of things in business that are this way. A lot of things in business are very simple, but it doesn't mean that they're easy. I can tell you how much to charge. Doesn't mean that charging that much to a client is going to be easy. I can tell you to switch your pricing model. Doesn't mean that teaching your entire team how to change their mindset around account management is going to be easy. And the other thing that I want to be clear about is precision and accuracy are not the same thing. And our focus in business should be to make accurate decisions that lead to the right outcome or the right insight. And a lot of times we conflate the idea of measuring very specific, precise, granular things or trying to factor a billion different data points into a price as leading us to a more accurate insight. In a lot of cases, the opposite is true. Because we make it so complicated, we actually end up with something that's very precise but not accurate, or that's so operationally complex that we can't do it consistently. And so therefore, we end up just making gut decisions in the end anyway. So today, I'm going to focus on things that deliver on those 2 promises. So let's start with a couple of first principles. Number 1, pricing and scoping. They're not the same thing, but often they are treated as the same thing and they happen in the same document. So what is the difference between these? Pop quiz. Any ideas? What is pricing? What is the exercise of pricing? Just yell it out. Okay, we have some mumbles. I have no idea what anybody said, but that's a start, okay? Pricing is about what the client will pay, right? What will they pay? That's it. How much money will we make from this? And scoping is really asking the question, what will it cost us? And so you can see these things are related because the relationship between these two things is margin. But the mistake I see a lot of companies make is this is happening in the same document. Even worse, this one document is the same document that's used to communicate the price to the client, as well as communicate the scope to the internal team. And what inherently happens there is a link is created between scope and price that is unbreakable. And so we end up in a situation where, for example, we present a price to the client says, that is outside of my budget, I need you to shave 10% off of that. And then the only way to adjust the price is to go and pretend that the scope has just gotten smaller. Let's remove some hours from this. And so we go back to the client, we present them with a price that's tenable, and then we lie to our internal team about what the expectations are. They're actually 10% higher than what we're telling them. But 6 months later, when the project is done, we've all forgotten that we explicitly made that decision, and now we're pissed off that we went over budget, and everyone seems like, this is a failure. But it's not a failure. These are the expectations we set for ourselves, but because our pricing and scoping models are intrinsically linked, then we had to lie to ourselves to get the numbers to work. So these are separate and distinct concepts, and they should exist in two different documents. And at the end of the day, anytime that we make a price, we should be clear on one formula. What is the direct delivery margin that we are going to accomplish by selling this deliverable to this client at this price? And this formula scales to an entire project or engagement if we're selling it as a big flat fee, and it scales all the way down to a single hour of time, or any other time unit we might sell. We might sell days, we might sell weeks, we might sell sprints, we might do that across a cross-functional team. At the end of the day, the math is always the same. So what is the formula for direct delivery margin? It is agency gross income, don't worry, I'll define what these mean, minus delivery cost over agency gross income. So let's talk about what these things mean. Agency gross income is the amount of money in an engagement that belongs to your agency. Yeah, I know, delivery, that's what that's supposed to say. It's just a scribble. Agency gross income is what you got paid minus whatever passes through you want to external vendors. So if you get paid $20,000 a month for a Facebook ads retainer, but you spend $12,000 a month on Facebook ads, that is an $8,000 a month retainer as far as agency gross income is concerned. Because that 12 grand doesn't belong to you, and you're not responsible for its profitability. So that passes through you. So print materials, advertising spend, if you're buying templates, if you're hiring white label vendors and partners, those are all pass-through expenses. We want to extract those from agency gross income. And then delivery cost is the cost of the time for the people that get this work done for the client. So I'll give you an example. If we have a project that after stripping out pass-through, we make $100,000, we spend $40,000 in our team's time to get it done. We divide that by 100K. What is the delivery margin on this engagement? Anybody good at math? 60%, okay. We're paying attention, very good. So let's talk about how to determine the target price. If we understand that scoping is the exercise of figuring out what it will cost us to do something, that is the first step in any pricing exercise, is what do we think this is going to take? So again, if we're selling time, we figure out the cost of an hour on average. If we're selling sprints, we figure out the cost of a sprint. If we're selling an entire engagement, you might do a full bottom-up estimation exercise. We arrive at what is our delivery cost on this? And that's usually going to be represented as here's how many hours we think it's going to take. We might segment those by role or by type of person if they have vastly different costs, and we multiply that by their average cost per hour. So in this example, let's say we have a delivery cost of $45,000. Okay? It's a big project. And then, in order to arrive at our price, we want to divide that by 1 minus our direct delivery margin target. So just as a rule of thumb, without getting into too much detail, we should be targeting 70% or higher direct delivery margin. So what that means is for every $1 in direct delivery cost that we're going to incur on a project, we want to essentially spend no more than, for every $1 we make, we want to spend no more than 30 cents to earn that dollar. So in this example, if we want to target 70%, or let's say in this example we want to target 75%, we divide 45 grand by 1 minus 75%, which is 0.25, and that gets us to 180K. So we need to make at least $180,000 in agency gross income on this project in order to be profitable and hit our 70% delivery margin target. And from there, we want to add on whatever pass-through expenses we're incurring. So let's say we're going to spend 20 grand on pass-through expenses. So we need to charge at least 200K for this engagement. So this is an example that, of course, speaks to a whole project, but if we had an hour of time that was $45 in cost, we would run the same equation, we would arrive at an hourly rate of $180. So this is the formula we can use, again, to arrive at what is the floor, what is the lowest we can go before we start to cut into our margins. And why do we want to target 70% or higher on a per project or on a direct level? Because we're going to lose 20% to time off, holidays, non-billable time, vacation time, et cetera, when we go from project to the P&L. Then we're going to spend another 30% on overhead, and that should leave us with at least 20% in net margin. So all things being equal, if your business looks a lot like the dozens of agencies that we audit every single quarter, and most of them will, those are the ratios that you're going to need to hit. If you can achieve a higher delivery margin than that by pricing on value, by using some kind of interesting packaging, by being more efficient, that's great. But this should be the floor, generally speaking, if you want to set yourself up for healthy margins and have enough cash flow to deal with all the shit that's going to go wrong, because let's be honest, there's always shit that's going to go wrong. So that is how we determine our floor price. Is everyone tracking so far? Yes or yes? Give me some jazz club, spoken word. Okay, good. We're having fun. Okay, now let's talk about the agency pricing quadrant. So now we understand how to set the floor for a price, but the next question is, how should we price this engagement? Should we sell time? Should we sell deliverables? Should we do that as a productized service, as a value-based service, or should we use some kind of abstracted version of these things? And our framework for this is quite simple. We want to consider two things when we are determining what the right pricing model is for an engagement. I want to talk specifically about enterprise here. The first thing we want to understand is value. Is this a high value engagement, or is this a low value engagement? And we've spent a lot of time in our industry talking about value when it comes to pricing. And there are generally two things that are going to determine value. The first thing I want to make clear here is value is the perception that the client has about the value of this engagement. It doesn't matter how valuable we think the engagement is. It matters how valuable the client thinks the engagement is. And there are two things that are predominantly going to drive value. The first is our positioning. Are we seen as one of the few options to solve this problem, therefore de-risking the chances that we're actually going to be able to solve this problem? Or are we positioning ourselves in such a way that we have a lot of different alternatives that the client can compare us to? So for example, if we are positioned as a graphic design firm, we're competing with everyone from Canva to IDEO and everything in between. Whereas if we position ourselves as a firm that solves complex product visualizations for the manufacturing industry through design, it's the same discipline, but there are far fewer firms that are going to be able to speak to that specific problem, and therefore if we're selling to a manufacturing firm with complex problems, we're much more likely to win the business. So positioning is one, and the second is relative value. And of course, this has to do with scale. If you've ever done conversion rate optimization, you'll know that a 1% conversion rate improvement on a website could take the same amount of effort for two different clients. But the client that's doing $10 million a month through their website is going to get far more value out of that 1% than somebody doing a fraction of it. So we have to think about the relativity of the value that we can unlock for a client. That usually comes with scale. So generally, when we're working with enterprise, these are going to be high value engagements because relatively speaking, the impact we can have on large businesses is very high. So this is not new information. Most of you are probably already familiar with this. The other thing that we want to consider, and that we all do intuitively, but nobody seems to be talking about this in the pricing conversation, is risk. Is this a low risk engagement or is this a high risk engagement? So what do I mean when I talk about risk? Well, when I'm talking about risk, I'm talking about how likely is it that I can predict what it will cost us to get this thing done. If I can get to within, let's say, 10 to 20%, that's a low risk engagement. So this is like I build a site on Shopify using a template for this industry. It's a small business. We've done it dozens of times. We know how long it takes to do this thing. We have the time tracking data. We have the processes. And this client is not big enough to pull us all over our process. Whereas, for example, I don't know, Coca-Cola comes to us and says, we need you to redo our website. It's going to be impossible to predict how long that's going to take. Half the stakeholders that we're talking to in that discovery call won't be there 18 months from now, whenever the requirements have all changed, the scope has changed, they've re-platformed, right? It would be irresponsible for us to try and predict what it's going to take to do that. And in fact, those of you that have worked on enterprise projects would know, trying to take a waterfall approach would be fundamentally problematic. It's just not the right methodology to even take on something that's that complex and fluid. And so in that case, it's unlikely we can predict it, and it might actually be the wrong thing to do, to try and predict up front what it's going to take and try to lock an engagement like that into a fixed scope when we actually should be more fluid in our approach if we want to solve the problem for the client. So now that we understand these things, the first step is to try and triangulate where on this quadrant does this project land. And most enterprise projects are going to land up here. So once we understand what is the composition of this project, then we can start to look at pricing models. If we have a high value and low risk engagement, this is typically where we're doing value-based, or if we want to go extreme, performance-based pricing. And the reason we do this is because we can arbitrage the high value nature of the work. We know what it's going to cost us, and we can use that to stretch up our margins. When we talk about low value, low risk, this is usually where we do flat rates or productized services, because we can create the perception of value for the client by taking on the risk. So instead of saying, hey, it's $500 an hour to build your Shopify site, we say, I can give you a blazing fast site and for 10 grand. In 2 weeks, it's proven to convert for your industry. You might still make $500 an hour, but that $10,000 sounds a lot better to the client than $500 an hour. If we have low value, low risk work, this is typically where we're going to sell hours or hourly billing. And when we have high value, high risk, this is where we start to see abstracted time and materials. And all I mean when I say abstracted time and materials is we abstract away from the hour. We're still selling time, but now we're expanding to larger swaths of time. Days, weeks, cross-functional teams. The most common form of this is sprints. And I know there's a few firms in here that work with enterprise that bill in sprints. Hands up if you bill in sprints. Yeah, Wouter does, Nihar does. So go talk to them. It's a different way of thinking. And the big idea there is when an enterprise client comes to us and says, this is the scope, we start to express the timeline as, hey, we think this is 20 to 30 sprints for the current backlog. It's 20 grand a sprint. You're going to get a cross-functional team. And what this changes is the dynamic in account management. When we have a fixed scope, our account management process is about scope protection. When the client wants to change something or ask for something different, the answer is yes, but we need to open up the scope of work. And if we know the nature of the engagement is going to be fluid, the contract is in the way of how we need to work with the client. Whereas if we sell them sprints, we're getting paid for time. And so if the client says, hey, we want to change something, we want to do something extra, the answer is yes, and. Do you want to do that before, after, or instead of these other things in the backlog? And most of those engagements that start as an upfront project evolve into a long-term relationship because there's always more work to do. There's always things changing. So hopefully these two main takeaways, number one, the formula you can use to arrive at the correct price, and this framework to help you identify which kind of pricing model should we be using to protect ourselves and share risk with the client or take advantage of low risk when it's there, helps you in your future pricing. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. And before I go, I want to give you all some free stuff. So if you want to dig deeper into agency profitability, measuring metrics, and get a whole bunch of training, toolkits, spreadsheets to help you implement all of this, scan the QR code and get into my funnel, and you will never get out. So with that, thank you very much, everyone. I'll see you around.